Annapurna. This magnificent mountain is special in many aspects. She is one of the 14 members of the 8,000er Club, and the world's 10th highest peak. Furthermore, until just recently overtaken by K2 in 2022, she was for 7 decades the world's most deadly mountain in terms of the fatality rate. And most notably, on the 3rd of June 1950, Annapurna became the first, above 8,000 meters mountain, climbed successfully. In this video, we will dive deep into the mysteries of Annapurna, and highlight all details of the 1950 French expedition that enabled mankind to reach a Himalayan peak at an altitude never explored before. In Sanskrit, Anna means nutritions or grains, and Purna means full or complete. Therefore, Annapurna translates to mean full of food. Looking at the impressive scenery, with Annapurna towering on the horizon behind towns and villages, combined with the never-ending source of fresh water for the local population, enabling them to grow rice, grain, and other agricultural products, explains the reason for the name of the mountain. Additionally, Annapurna has a high, religious and spiritual importance. The mountain is named after Parvati, the Hindu goddess of power, nourishment, devotion, motherhood, fertility, and harmony. Parvati is the wife of god Shiva, who is one of the main deities of Hinduism. She is the reincarnation of Sati, the first wife of Shiva who immolated herself during a fire sacrifice. Parvati is also the mother of the Hindu deities, Ganesha, and Kartikeya. She is believed to reside on Annapurna. That's why the inhabitants of the region respect the mountain as a synonym for Parvati, which explains the reason why the locals never attempted to climb it, and reach the summit, until the 1950 French expedition changed everything. Annapurna is not a single towering mountain, but the name of a massif in the Himalayas, located in north-central Nepal. The massif includes several impressive peaks. To be precise, the highest peak of the massif, Annapurna 1, is the 10th highest mountain in the world at 8,091 meters, or 26,545 feet above sea level. Furthermore, there are 13 peaks over 7,000 meters, or 22,966 feet, and 16 more over 6,000 meters, or 19,685 feet. Situated in the Gandaki province, the Annapurna Massif is 55 kilometers, or 34 miles long, and is bounded by the Kali Gandaki Gorge on the west, the Marshangdi River on the north and east, and the Pokhara Valley on the south. At its western end, the massif encloses a high basin called the Annapurna Sanctuary. Hiking to ABC, the abbreviation for Annapurna Base Camp, and along the Annapurna Sanctuary, offers breathtaking views of the Annapurna mountain range, along with the opportunity to experience the rich cultural heritage of the region. Nearby of the Annapurna Massif, there are 2 more 8,000er peaks. They are Dhaulagiri, which is the world's 7th highest peak, and Manaslu, the number 8 on the list of the top 14 highest mountains on our planet. Unlike the Khumbu Valley of the Himalayas in the east, and the Karakoram Range in the west, the Annapurna Massif was not well surveyed during the British colonial rule. Therefore, even after the Second World War, from a topographical point of view, the region had only been casually explored, and the mountain heights had been determined by surveyors with precision theodolites based far away in India. In December 1949, a team of 8 French mountaineers, led by Maurice Herzog, received permission from the authorities to enter Nepal and climb mountains. The goal was to summit Dhaulagiri. However, the maps they possessed were inaccurate, or simply wrong. After a long trek, the The team, accompanied by a large number of Sherpas, realized that despite their efforts they couldn't manage to locate Dhaulagiri. In steep and complicated terrain full of valleys, hills, and rivers, they missed their target by 33 kilometers and found themselves in front of the towering south face of Annapurna. Due to their profound mountaineering experience, gained in the European Alps, the team managed to find a more suitable route to the summit after days of intense exploration around the mountain. They decided to take the northwest face, and even today, this route is the most preferred one leading to the summit of Annapurna. Traveling to Nepal and reaching the Annapurna Massif, accompanied by 150 porters carrying the heavy equipment and supplies on their backs, trying hard to locate Dhaulagiri, but being forced to choose Annapurna 1 instead, followed by surveillance and analysis of Annapurna's steep south face, and deciding to take the seemingly easier and less dangerous northwest route to the summit, selecting a suitable location for the base camp, and establishing several high camps, were tasks that took more than 2 months for the team to accomplish. Finally, they started their first attempt to climb the mountain during the last week of May 1950. From May to July, there are precarious and volatile weather conditions in Nepal, caused by the monsoon. Knowledge of this yearly phenomenon, and the latest weather reports, should be considered as a serious warning for the team to give up their attempt to climb this unknown giant of a mountain. However, Herzog and the members of his team were not ready to give up at this stage, after all those arduous preparations for climbing Annapurna, and were determined to at least give it a try. The party moved their base camp to the furthest point that could be reached by porters, in the direction of the newly identified starting point, to the right bank of the North Annapurna Glacier at 4,400 meters or 14,500 feet. Camp 1 was set up on the glacier at 5,110 meters or 16,750 feet, with a relatively gentle slope up to the mountain, but with a considerable risk of avalanches. Camp 2 was in the middle of a plateau above the North Annapurna Glacier, and fairly well sheltered from rock fall and the effects of sudden storms. As shown in the original drawings by Herzog, after crossing an avalanche corridor, they were able to establish Camp 3 among some seracs on the far side of the glacier, and by the 28th of May they had established Camp 4, below a curving cliff of ice that they called the Sickle. On the next day, Herzog and Lakanal, accompanied by the Sherpas Ang Thake and Saki, moved Camp 4 to a better site at the top of the Sickle cliff, and named that location Camp 4A. On 2nd of June they climbed a gully through the Sickle to establish Camp 5, as their assault camp, on the snowfields above. With the monsoon now forecasted, time was extremely tight. Herzog offered the Sherpas the opportunity to climb together with him and Lakanal to the summit, which would have been a great honor. However, respecting the holy tranquility of the goddess Parvati, Ang Thake and Saki turned down Herzog's offer, and headed back to Camp 4A. Unaware of the medical fact, being at a high altitude without additional oxygen induces apathy. In a severe gale, Herzog and Lakanal spent the night without eating or sleeping. They didn't even bother lighting their stove in the morning to make hot drinks. At 6 a.m., it was no longer snowing, and they started their ascent to the summit. Soon after, they realized that their equipment was not suitable, and their boots were not adequately insulated for the conditions at these heights. Lakanal contemplated going down, fearing to lose his feet to frostbite. He asked Herzog what he would do if he did turn back to lower camps, and Herzog replied that he would continue pushing to the summit alone. Probably due to the effect of amphetamines, widely used by mountaineers in the 1950s as doping, Maurice Herzog was obsessed with the idea of reaching the summit, regardless of what the price they had to pay might be. Louis Lakanal was concerned about the safety of his friend, therefore he couldn't leave him to ascend alone, and decided to continue climbing with Herzog. Finally, a last couloir led them to the summit of Annapurna, at 1400 on 3 June 1950. They had climbed the highest summit ever reached at their time, the first 8,000er, and most remarkably on their very first attempt, at a mountain that had previously never been explored before. Lachenal was anxious to start the descent as soon as possible, but he obliged Herzog by photographing his friend, and the leader of the expedition, holding the French flag on the summit. After about an hour on the summit, no longer waiting for Herzog in his euphoric state to load another roll of film, Lachenal set off back down at a furious pace. Reluctantly, Herzog followed him, into a storm, gathering below the summit. On the way to Camp 5, at some stage, Herzog took his gloves off, and laid them down to open his pack. Catastrophically, they slid away down the mountain, so he had to continue his descent bare-handed. At Camp 5, Herzog was met by two of his teammates, Lionel Terray and Gaston Rebuffat, who had brought up a second tent, hoping to make their summit attempt the next day. They were horrified at the state of Herzog's frost-bitten hands. Lachenal was missing, but Herzog, unable to think clearly, said he would be arriving soon. Later they heard Lachenal calling for help. He had taken a long fall to below the camp, had lost his ice axe and a crampon, and his feet were seriously frostbitten. Terray scrambled down to him, and Lachenal pleaded to be taken down to Camp 2, for urgent medical help. Terray managed to persuade him to go back up to Camp 5, which, of course, under those circumstances, was the only responsible decision. Terray and Rebuffat plied everyone with hot drinks through the night, and did their best to restore blood circulation in the fingers and toes of their teammates. The next morning, they started to descend towards the next lower camp, while the storm was still raging. They could not find Camp 4A anywhere, and they were desperate to avoid staying out in the open exposed to the freezing wind of the storm. While they were frantically trying to dig a snow hole, Lachenal fell through some snow, covering a crevasse. Fortunately, he landed in a snow cave that could provide some slight shelter for them all in the night. They had no food or water, and only one sleeping bag. In the night, snow poured in on them, burying their boots and cameras. The next morning they took a long time to find their boots, but their cameras, with the only photographs taken at the summit, could not be found. They climbed out of the crevasse, but by now Terray and Rebuffat became snowblind because of the UV rays reflected off the ice. Therefore, the two climbers, crippled with frostbite, had to lead their two blind comrades slowly down, until by extreme good fortune, they were met by Marcel Schatz. He was looking for them, and waiting for their return from the summit. Schatz guided his four friends back down to Camp 4A. Jean Cousy was at the camp. He supported Schatz in assisting Herzog, Rebuffat and Lachenal down the Sickle Cliff to Camp 4, where Anthake, Saki, and some other Sherpas were sheltering. Meanwhile, Terray had chosen to stay at Camp 4A, trying to get the blood circulation back into his feet. Schatz climbed back up to help him descend, also taking the opportunity to recover the still camera from the crevasse shelter, the cine camera he could not find. As the six climbers and the Sherpa team descended below Camp 4, the air temperature rose rapidly, causing a crack to appear in the snow, right under Herzog's group. An avalanche swept them down about 150 meters or 500 feet, until their rope caught on a ridge. Herzog was left dangling upside down, with his rope around his neck, while the two Sherpas assigned to him were caught on their end of the rope. Descending further in agony, Herzog was becoming reconciled to being close to death. Eventually, they reached the comparative safety of Camp 2. Herzog now felt he had succeeded as a leader, Even if he now died, his companions would be safe, and Annapurna had been conquered. As if thrown down by gods to punish them, many follow-up avalanches occurred during a short period. At Camp 2, Jacques Oudot, the expedition's doctor, injected Herzog and Lachenal to help improve their blood flow. The injections in the arteries of the legs and the arms were excruciatingly painful, and they needed to be repeated for many days afterward. On 7th of June, everyone started descending again, with Herzog, Lachenal, and Rebuffat lying on sleds carried by Sherpas. Unfortunately, the efforts of Dr. Oudot could not prevent frostbite from developing into consequent gangrene. Miristi Khola is a turbulent river that drains all the waters from the upper basins of Annapurna. Needing to hurry before the monsoon made the Miristi Khola impassable through flooding, they reached Camp 1, as the sky clouded over, and heavy rains started. From Camp 1, on June 8, they wrote a telegram, announcing that Annapurna had been climbed, to be taken by a runner for sending to Paris. The route to base camp was over terrain unsuitable for sledges, so Sherpas carried Herzog and Lachenal on their backs. Once at base, and just at the right time, a large team of porters arrived, to transport the whole expedition back to Leyte on the Gandaki River. As expected, and feared, the monsoon made the task of leaving the mountain extremely hard to fulfill. On the 10th of June, the heavy rain became torrential, and all rivers in the area started to rise rapidly. A team led by Marcel built a makeshift bridge over the Miristi Khola, and everyone hurried towards the bridge along paths that required Lachenal to be carried in a human cacolet, and Herzog in a wicker basket. They became stranded in the open under heavy rain, when it became too dark to continue their trek. The next morning, they reached the bridge. The river had risen dangerously high below the span, forcing them to undertake the difficult crossing immediately. Everyone got across safely and camped for the night. By morning the bridge had been swept away. Herzog and Lachenal had to be carried on quarterback, even while the expedition doctor kept amputating their gangrenous fingers and toes one by one as they made their way down to Leyte, and then over the next month down to the Indian border. In the end, Herzog lost all of his toes and most of his fingers. Also, Lachenal lost all of his toes. They had hoped to follow Miristi Khola down to where it joined the Kali Gandaki, but a reconnaissance showed this would be impossible due to large-scale flooding. They were forced to climb the Nilgiri Ridge, to return the way they had come. After weeks of trekking under heavy rain, they reached an area with a thick jungle. Herzog developed a high fever and his health condition deteriorated dangerously. The group eventually reached the Gandaki. Stretchers could be used on the track heading south beside the Gandaki, but at Beni they took a detour because there was a cholera outbreak in the area ahead. At last, on the 6th of July, they reached Nortanwa where they boarded a train that took them to Raxaul at the Indian border. The climbers went on to Delhi to wait there, while Herzog and a select group, including 2 Sherpas, travelled to Kathmandu to be received by the Maharaja of Nepal. On July 11, 5 weeks after reaching the summit, Herzog and the Sherpas were greeted by the Maharaja as national heroes. The telegram, giving news of the success, was reported by Le Figaro on the 16th of June, but the team managed to arrive home at Orly Airport in Paris 1 month later, on 17th of July. They were greeted by a wildly cheering crowd while Herzog was carried off the aircraft first. Followed by Lionel Terray, carrying Louis Lachenal in his arms. 1950s was a time when expeditions to the highest mountains of the world were national prestige projects, and were handled more like military operations. Expedition leader Herzog was the commander, without any ifs and buts. He had the final say. All expedition members had to take an oath beforehand. I solemnly promise to obey the expedition leader in everything he asks of me during the course of the expedition." The other team members pledged not to publish any reports about the first ascent after they returned to France. Only Herzog was allowed to do that. His book, Annapurna, the first conquest of an 8,000-meter peak, became an international bestseller with over 11 million copies sold. Louis Lachenal survived his success on Annapurna by only 5 years. Despite having lost all of his toes, he trained hard and learned to adapt to climbing in his new condition. Unfortunately, in November 1955, at the age of 34, he died of injuries caused by falling into a snow-covered crevasse while skiing the Vallée Blanche in Chamonix. Lachenal had kept notes and a diary. His book about the Annapurna expedition, called Carnets du Vertige, was published after his death. Within the next 10 years, after the very first summit of an above 8,000 meters peak, the other 13 members of this exclusive club were also conquered. However, remarkably enough, it took 20 years before Annapurna was successfully summited again. The 1970 British Annapurna South Face expedition was a Himalayan climb that was the first to take a deliberately difficult route up the face of an 8,000-meter mountain. On the 27th of May 1970, Don Willens and Dougal Haston reached the summit of Annapurna 1. Chris Bonington led the expedition, which approached a glacier from the Annapurna Sanctuary, and then used rock climbing techniques to put fixed ropes up the steep south face. Although the plan had been to use supplementary oxygen, in the event it was not possible to carry any cylinders high enough for the lead climbers to use on their summit bid. Lower down on the mountain, on the 30th of May, as the expedition was about to leave, Ian Clough was killed by a falling serac. Several members of the expedition rose to fame in Britain, and as a whole the expedition received international recognition in mountaineering circles on account of its innovative and extremely difficult nature. From the day Ian Clough died, until today, Annapurna claimed many more victims. In the early days, Annapurna had fewer climbers, a very low success rate, and many tragedies. It also featured more adventure, surprise, and 2 mountain faces to consider attempting. The goal with Annapurna was to make it down alive. It was a peak for seasoned, self-sufficient climbers only. Some excellent climbers lost their lives there, such as Alex McIntyre, Anarki Ochoa de Olza, Yong Sok Park, and Anatoly Bukreev. Things started to change in the 2010s. Until then, ascents with supplementary oxygen were extremely rare. Around 2010, some climbers from India, China, and a few working Sherpas began to do oxygen-assisted climbs. In 2015, the use of oxygen became the new normal. Scaled-up expedition logistics, limitless use of oxygen, a huge staff of rope fixers, and supporting Sherpas have improved safety, because everyone needed to spend less time on the mountain. Climbers jumping up fixed ropes are much faster, and the oxygen allows them to summit with just one rotation, or even none, in some cases. The Nepalese guides know every millimeter of the route. They know the safest spots to set the lines and pitch the camps. Drones assess conditions in sections above the climbers, and helicopters have improved rescues. As seen in 2021, they may also resupply teams as high up as Camp 4. According to the statistics of the Himalayan database, as per April 2024, Annapurna has a total of 476 summits and 73 deaths. Given that the convention for calculating relative risk on 8,000 meters peaks is done by dividing the number of summits by the number of deaths, Annapurna is no longer the most dangerous 8,000 meters peak. On 3 June 2020, exactly 70 years after the first summit success on an above 8,000 meters mountain, the government in Kathmandu officially named 2 7,000 meters peaks after the 2 Frenchmen. The 7,555-meter high Herzog Peak, also known as Kangzar Kang West, and the 7,140-meter high Lachenal Peak, aka Gangapurna West, are located in the region around Annapurna.
We hope you liked this video, and found it informative. If yes, then we would very much appreciate it if you would consider giving a thumbs up, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.